There we go.
Here we are again. By the way, I had that slide up because the rarest of beasts in Hollywood is 100% Rotten Tomatoes score, and your documentary on your dad, 100%. That's incredible, and it's a beautiful, heartfelt piece. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and of course, Rod. I brought us all here together. I mean, there's a lot to talk about on the Roddenberry Archive. I wanted to share our vision for that, but we were showing a lot of what we were doing with with Spock, and one of the things that people may not know. I knew you. Got to know you through Rod, and very early on, before we did anything, Susan Nimoy, your dad's wife, is the producer on the project. But years before that, as we were just testing this out and doing test Larry, I remember Rod shared with you a picture, and it was very important for me to know that this was something you were even okay with. And if we didn't get that, we wouldn't have done anything. We wouldn't be here today talking about unification or anything like that. And I just think that the legacy of everything that both your parents have created and done, and how that inspires us and others today, is just one of the topics I want to touch on. And Adam, starting with you, I mean, your experience with Star Trek and your dad's work and your current work, I'd love to just get into all of that, and then go from there.
Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I think for you, I mean, going back to unification, I remember showing you some of the pieces early, and I mean, when you think of your dad's likeness being used in this, your reaction was different than I expected. You're like, I want to see more of Spock, more stuff in there. I mean, You feel like we're honoring your dad's legacy in the right way? Could we? I mean, that's such an important part of it, and I think maybe speaking of that for a little bit before we get into the rest would be good.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you are. I think my dad would be very positive about the project. I think he'd be very supportive. I mean, I think he'd be very interested in the technology.
Yeah.
The question for him, as always, as it was for Gene, was what is the story about?
Yeah.
And can you really create more Star Trek, more stories about, which they've done in the Star Trek universe, but more stories about the human condition and the morality tale, and keep the adventure going. I mean, these are going to be the hard questions to answer, is what's the story about? This is the number one thing I learned from my dad when I was trying to learn about directing in TV, is you have to have some idea of what is the moral of what you're trying to convey and communicate. So I think unification is a great step in the right direction. You've got a lot of elements going on there, and you traverse a lot of the timescape of the Star Trek universe there, and you have some great characters, and Larry does a great job, and my dad looks great, Bill looks great. What is the next step? And who, what is the next challenge for you, and what are we going to find out about what it's like to be here on planet Earth? How can this shed more light and illuminate what our lives are going to be like, or what our lives are like now?
Yeah, and that's the point of Star Trek. And Larry, when Bill saw the piece, he also asked, like, what does this mean? What is the next step of where all this goes? And I think for us, unification was very much like, can we even do this and get this part right before we explore anything further? But to your point, with all the stuff with AI, I feel human storytelling and the story is everything. I mean, the democratization of the tools is good, but that means that the storytelling is going to be the driving force. I think less explosions and CG and more heart and authenticity is such an important part of it. And vision-wise, I mean, I think for all of us here on this stage, I mean, the story of Star Trek is fundamentally about that and exploring the human condition, and especially in these times where there's a lot of uncertainty about where things go, technology-wise, politically, and maybe that's been the case in the past. But Rod, maybe we also could touch on just your hopes for the archive and how we're doing on that and everything. I mean, I think it's salient to all of this.
Coming into Star Trek a little later in life, just because of maturing a little bit later in life, I really started to appreciate that Star Trek was just more than entertainment. It really talked to a lot of people, and the stories that I have had brought to me throughout my life, and the opportunities to meet incredible people who share how Star Trek inspired them, was mind-blowing. And Star Trek certainly isn't the only thing out there. There's tons before, there's tons after. But the Roddenberry Archive is a great example of what can be done to archive anything.
Yeah.
A friend just leaned over in the audience and said, bringing back old NASA, bringing back some of the astronauts, bringing back, some of those experiences. Anything, the Roddenberry Archive is an example. But it's also Gene Roddenberry, the philosophy Star Trek. Star Trek is that example to the world of what we could be. and you're bringing it back to life in a new way, which I think having these opportunities to have these experiences, walking through the bridge, touching props or seeing props, that is truly spectacular. But to bring the story, to bring the idea of Star Trek back, the messaging of who we could be one day, who we have the potential to be, which is Star Trek was all about, that's what's the most important thing to me. And archiving Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek, and everything in between lays the foundation for that, for us to grow and build on it, which is what you've been doing with OTOY and Octane and all these great technologies.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, the future of storytelling, the tools are there to tell the story, but I think that, the idea of archiving this stuff is so that, the story of Star Trek and other things, you're right. I mean, the story of NASA is huge. I mean, the mythologies we have in our lives are beautiful, and there is sort of a desire, I think, to immerse yourselves in there. But I think on the philosophy of Star Trek, from maybe each of you, like in the current moment, how do you feel like the lessons that you'd like to see Star Trek impart on us matter? Like, what is on your guys' minds as storytellers, as citizens in the world? I mean, there's such an intricate, entangled part of Star Trek fandom and creativity. I'd love to get your take on that.
Well, I think we're living in a polarized world.
Yeah.
We've got a pretty divided nation. Star Trek, the whole message is not only are we going to get it together here in this country, we're going to get together on the planet, and we're going to partner with other planets to work together to try to spread the message throughout the universe. So it's a message of hope, I think, and that we're going to end violence, that there will be some sense of camaraderie, that we will find common goals together. And it's a message that we're hungry for now. It's just so interesting, and so it's still so timely and so prescient even back then. I was thinking about what made it so popular in the 70s is really when the explosion of the franchise occurred. And I was just doing some research on Wikipedia, my favorite resource, and I was looking at some of the top shows from the 1970s, and it was MASH was like the #1 show, and it dealt with some political, social issues, but it was also like Mary Tyler Moore and All in the Family and Mork and Mindy and Charlie's Angels. I mean, talk about counter-programming. Star Trek was really pushing everything to the forefront about what is important, what are the social issues we need to confront. I mean, Gene was really prescient about this. He was really trying to spin morality tales and get people to really focus on the stuff that was important, disguising it under science fiction so that you can get past the censors at NBC. Well, that stuff is still relevant now. People, we want hope for the future. A lot of us still love IDIC, infinite diversity, infinite combinations. I mean, we're loving that. We love the idea of Spock the outsider, that it's okay to be different and other than the mainstream. I mean, that's the whole ideal for Spock, is that he just gave such legitimacy to people like myself who are geeks, weirdos, social misfits, nerds, and not popular, and all that I think people are still hungry for. And that's, to me, that's why Star Trek has become one of the most successful franchises in pop culture history.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you, Rob.
I'm just going to maybe echo some of that. I'll just speak about my own issues. Fear. We're kind of living in a world of fear right now, I think. We always have been, since we've been climbing down from the trees. But, to be inspired to have hope for that future, to see others out there who are kind of bucking the system here and going against the norm, not just for the sake of, but because they were told they couldn't, and they believed in it, so they went and figured out how. It's one of the things I admire about you. You are told, well, it's not done that way, it can't be done that way. You end up writing the program that does it that way. They're saying it can't be done on GPUs, as you're saying. You're like, well, I'm going to do it on GPUs, and here we are. Not everyone can do that, but in our own little ways, we can push our own boundaries, get rid of our fear, or at least try to overcome our fear, and try to see our vision through. It's easier to say than to do, for sure. But right now, we live in a climate of, I think, a lot of fear, myself included. We all have our insecurities, and if we can recognize those and are willing to, and again, I can say this better, I can do it, listen to others and hear points of view, we can at least, even if we don't agree with them, we can hopefully expand our own point of view a little bit so that there's some growth, there's some evolution intellectually, and we can better ourselves. And I think that's what Star Trek is, bettering ourselves. And I take Star Trek very seriously. We do not have to have a federation. We do not have to have an enterprise. I think it would be very cool. I'm just saying that future, and I think those of you here who have seen Star Trek and get Star Trek, that's one of the reasons you love that Star Trek. It's not a bad direction for us to head in. So I'm all for promoting Star Trek, the archive of Star Trek, and that whole philosophy in any way that I can.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. When people ask me about the future, I always say, how I hope it turns out is the way that, Gene had this ideal, utopian vision of the future, no conflict, an abundant society. And their points, for people who aren't familiar with the point I was making earlier, the last time that Gene actually, I think, worked on anything with Spock and Kirk and the original crew was the motion picture. After that, Nick Meyer took over and did, and he wrote a book. The one and only Star Trek book was this novel, The Motion Picture. And I remember when we were talking about things to promote in the archive or build on, we were having these discussions where Gene talks a lot about the society of the 23rd century, and I was fascinated that things that aren't in the film, where he talks about new humans and all of them going into this virtual world, and all of this is so prescient. I mean, the thing, even with AI, when people sort of fear it. I mean, you had examples. I mean, V'ger, the whole story of the motion picture was about AI, basically, just missing its humanity and that connection being their data. I remember interviewing your dad when I was 13 and asking him, well, what's this character about? And he was like, well, it's, again, a machine trying to be human. I mean, celebrating the humanity is in the future, and all of that is such a big part of the message. And honestly,
I've known him since I was 12 or what, 12?
Yeah.
And every time he speaks, I learn something new about something, usually Star Trek. Just hearing him say things about the motion picture, I'm like, oh, it was like that. Huh. Yeah, but please, continue.
All these things, I mean, the archive is an exploration of these things, but that moment in time is also, I think, probably one of the last times that your two dads worked together. I think the motion picture was that thing, and I know your dad didn't have a great experience on that film. But the motion picture was an ambitious film. I mean, it's like when we do all the stuff we're doing, even with these little cinematic pieces, is going back to 2001 and Arthur C. Clarke's vision and that Kubrick put on film. I mean, it's interesting to me because I think that's interesting from a filmmaking perspective, but also the unknown is fascinating to me in representing that and V'ger and all these things. And there's a little bit of that in there. And I think, Larry, I wanted to sort of have you also speak to, we didn't have a ton of time on the last panel, but you were there when Shatner saw the piece for the first time. And I think the first thing he said to you was, oh, you look like Spock, but you also spent a solid amount of time with him. I mean, what was your experience just seeing people's reaction to the piece for the first time? I mean, it was lovely, and you filmed a lot of it and everything, but I mean, how's it felt to be part of this and also just looking at it from the outside in and having that perspective all the way up to the day of the launch of this thing.
This may sound kooky, but it was in some ways a holy moment. The feeling of reverence when you're on the bridge of the Enterprise, physically there, you're leaning against the railing because Captain Kirk himself is in the chair, which is where he should always be, and you're just in this, and David Gerald's at my elbow, and and the people that have come, the place is packed. I guess there isn't a sign on the bridge that says occupancy of more than 75 people is not allowed. Place is packed, and you watch a film like this, and there's this feeling that it's like a singular moment in time. You're grateful to be alive for this moment, to see the reaction that he has to something of beauty and love. And it's based on a love of him and his character and the work that he's done in the whole Star Trek universe. People were tearing up, and I think some of it is from the film and some of it just was from the feeling, the emotion of being in that space. Just absolutely phenomenal. And you could tell that William Shatner is sitting there absorbing all of this, and he was silent for some time trying to process what he had just seen. And I can only imagine what was going on in his head. I had seen Robin Curtis the first time that she had seen a young version of herself on a monitor, and suddenly she sees she's 28 years old again, and you could see her whole body just almost like stiffen up, like, oh my God, there's such a yearning, a desire. And I think that was it, when you interviewed him, didn't he ask at one point, can you make me young?
Yeah.
And I think that was the one. He's 94 now. And he's done everything. He's been to space, he's been to the South Pole, he's been everywhere. And that's the one thing that any of us might have as one last wish that we're denied. Can you make me young? And you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, going back even to, when we were talking, I think in the last year, I remember you were sharing some notes about your dad when he was directing Star Trek 3 and the whole idea of Saavik having a son and everything. I mean, what was it like with being with your dad during that moment when he was directing these things? I mean, and also I think maybe your two dads did a slightly different take on Star Trek. I mean, I remember your dad had said, the canon is something that, don't get obsessed over it. Think about the message more. I mean, any thoughts on that, Adam?
Well, I think it was a great experience for him. He really wanted to expand as an artist. That's, my dad typically is one of the quintessential artists in terms of trying to find new ways to express himself creatively. So, and his whole philosophy with the studio was the only thing the studio understood was a 2x4 to the head. So the only way he was going to be in Star Trek 3 is if he was going to be behind the camera, because he just felt like he wanted to challenge himself. So I think it was and we were all rooting for him. I remember this distinctly. I was in law school at the time when he was being considered for the project, and some of the powers that be at Paramount were like, there's no actors are going to direct this film. And it was a hard line for a while. But, like Nick Meyer says, and For the Love of Spock, my little documentary, as long as my dad was willing to walk away from the project without being involved in it, then he was going to get what he wanted. And that's kind of, the way it played out strategically. I think it was just a really great experience. It was a good time for him. It was a great experience for him. I think he loved working with the original cast. He loved working with Robin Curtis. He loved working with you. He invited me to participate in the project. I could have been engaging in Ponfar with Robin Curtis. I thought it was a great opportunity, but I was trying to create a law career for myself at the time and thought it might not really necessarily be going in the right direction to do that. It was really it was a great time for him. He was, it was a really transitional period for all of us, and I think you learned a lot about filmmaking, and it gave him the credibility he needed with the studio to get to Star Trek 4, which I really think is his crowning achievement. I mean, I think it's the biggest box office grosser of the original 6 films of the original cast. So a very exciting time for him and for the rest of the family, and I think it shows on the screen.
Yeah, and then you went from law school to directing because you've directed. I'd love to even talk about the things you're doing. I've been writing a book. Let's share with the audience maybe a little bit about that journey and the stuff you're doing now.
Well, I practiced law for a number of years, and then a lot of it is about wanting to create my own path and do something different than what my old man can do, because he was a very towery figure, very intimidating, and I just wanted to do something. I didn't want to replicate what he was doing, and I thought a law career would do that. They don't tell you in law school what it's really like to go out there and practice. And when you get out there, it's not quite what it seemed. And then in the end, I just wanted to be like my dad. I just wanted to be a storyteller. I went to an acting class and got very turned on by it creatively. And it was Jeff Corey who taught my dad, incidentally, acting very, in the early days. And it was just a kind of exciting, experience for me. And it was something I wanted to replicate on some level. So I was in the TV world for a while. My dad helped me quite a bit. I always was interested in pop culture and storytelling. And this was one of the times when my experience with my dad was very good. He was very helpful. He was very positive in helping me make that transition out of something that I was really not meant to do for the rest of my life, which was, negotiating entertainment deals and talking on the phone with attorneys and clients all day. It's just not something I was really cut out for. I really enjoyed the career I had in Hollywood. And it was also a good period of time for me and my dad. But the big picture with Leonard was he's a very complicated guy, a very difficult guy to love, as I think Bill Shatner found out.
Did he call you, by the way, you and Julie, like you said in the piece to us?
I'm sorry?
Did he give you that? Because remember in the piece that inspired me, he's saying, I reached out to Julie and Adam to talk about why Leonard's not calling me back. I don't know if.
Oh yeah, well we've, yeah. Bill and I have talked about this a little bit. The fact is, on that issue, which is still a hot topic, is about Bill and Leonard's relationship, is that, there were a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of competition between the two of them, and they're very close in age. It's amazing that, my dad would be 94 had he survived. It's amazing that Bill keeps going. He's only, I think, 4 days older than my dad. They're lucky that the fact of the matter is that the work on screen is phenomenal, that they're one of the greatest dynamic duos in pop culture history, period. I would say to my dad, how is that possible if you guys had so much conflict and a lot of competition between these two Jewish boys in outer space? And, my dad's attitude was we were professionals, and they were. They both had a lot of experience going into Star Trek, and they knew, what they were doing when they got there. They found a close relationship later on in life. My dad announced to my sister and myself that Bill was his best friend, and we were just shocked by this because they had spent so many years in conflict together. So that they had found each other at all and had a close, loving relationship for a while was phenomenal. Unfortunately, it didn't last. I think Bill loves Leonard. I think he always loved my dad. Bill has his own foibles, I loved Leonard. I love Bill. It was a big love fest. But loving Leonard was a very complicated proposition, and I found that out as being his son. It could be very tumultuous. And that's, my new book, The Most Human, is really the journey of that difficult relationship and trying to reconcile myself with a man who's loved and adored by millions of fans all over the world. Because we just had a lot of ups and downs in our relationship, and I try to do the deep dive on that in terms of how 12-step recovery was what was the key that we needed to reconnect and find unification, quote unquote, in our own relationship. I wished Bill and Leonard had found it before my dad passed away. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Luckily for me, and with a lot of gratitude, I did find a way to reconnect and reunify with my dad in a loving way, to the point where we had a very close relationship the last years of his life.
It's beautiful. And I mean, Rod, I remember, because of course, Rod is my brother, I knew your mom so well, I knew your dad a little bit, but the thing that Rod and I shared is that Gene passed away your dad I think a few months before my dad passed away. And I remember Trek Nation, your documentary, it's very similar, right? And that was the first time I remember you diving into the world of Star Trek to explore what that relationship for you was. And I'd love to just, like Adam just did, maybe talk about that a little bit. And you're also, by the way, for those who don't know, Rod's executive producer on all the current Star Trek shows, and working on the current Star Trek of today. But that history is such a big part of the archive and everything that we've experienced as friends together too.
Yeah, no, I kind of came into it backwards. I came in it through fandom, because I was a little kid running around watching, Knight Rider and things like that, and didn't really watch Star Trek, and what I had seen wasn't really for me. As I mentioned earlier, it took me a while to mature, and I'm still working on it. I went to conventions when I was a kid, and it was just a cool place where everyone was wearing a costume. I was watching Star Wars more than I was watching Star Trek when I was a little kid. And after talking to fans, after hearing so many incredible stories, I became inspired by the fans to essentially watch Star Trek. I hadn't not seen anything. I just wasn't like a die-hard Trekkie or anything yet. I fell in love with The Next Generation. As true a fan as you can be, I loved watching the show. Now, my father would bring the episode home on Thursday, VHS, and I got to watch that, which was really cool. But it really taught me a lot, I think, about, I would say, like, humanity and even leadership. I like the idea that the captain doesn't have to rule with authority. A captain can can work with his crew, and he puts people in their position and then trusts what they can do in that position. And it was sort of an eye-opening experience that you can do something, you can earn the respect of people around you, and once you earn that respect, you get people who will, I mean, on some level, do anything for you, especially aboard the Enterprise.
Yeah.
But it comes from integrity. It comes from being a good human being, which is sometimes a struggle.
Yep.
So there's a lot to take away from Star Trek, and the stories I heard were just unbelievable for a TV show at the time. But I became very proud of it, and I believe in. I'm a fan. I believe in that future. I want that future to happen. I think we have the potential. I have been somewhat less optimistic recently. Things are a little hard, but that's the right time to go out and start talking to people, because I will get shown different points of view and different perspectives, and it really helps you move forward and advance and maybe change your own thinking a bit. So, I mean, all I can say is I became a fan of Star Trek. And I'll tell you what, I'm more a fan of the philosophy than I am the TV show. You as I said, you know a ton more. I mean, most people in this room probably know more Star Trek than I really do. But when it comes down to the ideas behind it, that's what I ultimately love. And I feel like if Star Trek is just about science fiction, it's not Star Trek.
Yeah.
If it's just about action, if it's just about good guy, bad guy, that's not Star Trek.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be great drama, it might be great sci-fi, but Star Trek, in my mind, is somewhat of a narrow window.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time, gentlemen, but I thank you all for being here, and I hope we're doing both of your dads proud with the work we're doing in the archive. And again, thank you for joining me on.
Thank you for doing this, and the entire OTOY team. Way to go!
Amazing.